All right. Well, it is 11 o'clock, so let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to the Wednesday workshop with EFCA West. And my name is Katie Dudgeon, and I'm thrilled that you're joining us today because I am so excited about the guests that we have and the topic at hand, trauma care conversations. And so just wanted to welcome you. A little bit of setup on the Wednesday workshop. Generally speaking, please keep your microphone on mute. I know we're well into the Zoom era, so we're all pros at this by now. But if you do have a question, feel free to put it in the chat, and I will do my best to be tracking that as we facilitate the conversation today. And really the plan for today is to take about 45 minutes or so to really introduce you to the material called Trauma Care Conversations. And then we'll take about 10-15 minutes at the end just to answer your questions, and to understand the resources that are available to you. So keep that in mind. If you have questions, jot them down, or if you'd like to put them in the chat right away, either way, that will help us on the back end to be able to make this valuable and helpful for you. So with no further ado, I would like to welcome our guest, Katrina Welch. Hopefully you can see her in one of your squares. And she is working with Reach Global Crisis Response, which is a division of Reach Global that actually works overseas and in the US. And so I had the privilege of crossing paths with her recently in Hungary and learned about this resource that is available to us that Kat has helped develop. And that is what we call Trauma Care Conversations. So it's not actually material that is to help you be a psychologist or a therapist. It is material to help the everyday person come alongside people who are facing crisis or have experienced crisis, in the middle of crisis. And so that's really what our conversation today is going to focus on, this material and how it's helpful for you in your ministry, in your church, in your community, with church volunteers, maybe even with those outside of the church community. And so you'll hear a little bit about how this material has been used, and also how you can then maybe utilize it in your own context or setting. And so I would just like to take a moment and actually, Kat, have you just share a little bit about yourself, but can you tell us first what you've been up to lately? Where have you been?
Everywhere. So I'll start with current situation right now. I'm in Lake Charles, Louisiana. As part of crisis response, we go in after the storm, whatever the storm may be. It could be a fire, flood. Here, it happened to be 2 hurricanes 6 weeks apart, record freeze just 4 months later, and then 16 inches of rain in 6 hours, 2 months later. So Lake Charles got hit really hard in 2021. Mm-hmm. But I have a solid team here. I'm the leader of the site here, but just recently, starting about March 1st, I did a little traveling. I started out in the Philippines. They had a very big typhoon on December 19th. I was there March 1st, and a majority of the people I spoke to still did not have power. And then from the Philippines, I traveled to Hungary, was in Hungary for about a week, working with the Reach Global Budapest city team and some of their partners. And then from Hungary, I went over to Poland, and I was about 4 kilometers from the Ukraine border for the next 6 weeks, working with Ukrainian refugees that were coming over just to escape the conflict there. So I've really been all over. Now full circle back to Lake Charles, but just for a short time, because I'll be out in California in just a little bit, and then back in Poland.
I mean, that is unbelievable. Your experience and ability to navigate cultures so quickly and still be present is so valuable. And I am so thankful that you were available today for this call, because it's going to be a lot more interesting with you on the call than just me. And so, like I said earlier, you and I had the chance to cross paths in Budapest, Hungary. And that's where I got to sit in on an actual trauma care conversation workshop that you were facilitating. And I came in late, and I think we were short on time as well. But even that window that I got, I sat there and thought, whoa, this is so simple and easy to grasp, and yet so profound and powerful, because I saw the impact it had in the room of those who were there, because it helped them reflect on their own experiences. And you acknowledge that, but yet it also allowed them to show up well with others. And I've seen you do that. I know you're doing that. And so I am thrilled to benefit from your experience and to help our whole district benefit from the experience that you've had in these materials. So could you tell us a little bit about how this came about? Like why we even need training in this area?
Yeah, so I'm going to just back up one little step and talk about when Crisis Response was formed. Mark Lewis, our director, he was in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. And as he was looking around at all of the people who were devastated, homes are devastated, lives just turned upside down. And there were so many people in there doing the physical work, which that's amazing. Those people needed that help in that moment. But he started questioning, what about the spiritual? What about the emotional? And there were not a lot of people out there ministering to the spiritual and emotional needs of the people who were really hurting. And he thought, what an opportunity we have to go in and do this. So we're going to fast forward a whole bunch, so we're going to skip a lot of all that, but fast forward a bunch. I came on staff in full-time 2013 after Hurricane Sandy. I was in Staten Island for 2.5 years. But prior to that, my background was a behavior analyst and a counselor for the state of Minnesota. My heart is with the emotional and spiritual needs of the people that I'm meeting. And so going in after the storm, you just see it, you see the need. And one day I sat down with Mark and said, what can I do? I mean, this is my heart and I'm here rebuilding a house and that's great. I'm glad, but we need to take this to another level. And just weeks after that, the earthquake, a major earthquake in Nepal happened. And that's when it really got started for us as a ministry to go in and start talking to people about trauma care conversations. So often people will experience something really hard and another individual will want to come alongside of them, but they won't know how. How do we come alongside of people who are hurting? How do we have those conversations? What do we say and what don't we say? And I realized more and more that people don't know how to initiate the conversation. And then they may start it, but they don't take it to the level of where healing can begin. So we've been trying to equip people to be able to do that.
So how you told me a little bit about the material and how it got developed. How did it get shaped, and where, is this original material that you developed, or is this something you've kind of tweaked for your own context then?
Yeah, so it's gone through a number of variations. As you can imagine, 2015, we've tweaked it, we've changed it a lot in those timeframes to work with specifically within the crisis context that we're seeing. But again, I started out as a counselor, so I have a whole background of information, a wealth of knowledge in my brain. And I was just like, but how do we convey this to people in an hour and a half? You can't do that well. So we needed to make a shorter, more concise. And many of you on the call maybe have heard of critical incident stress debriefing, critical incident stress management. It's going in after a crisis and helping people debrief. It's very secular. And there's a couple of different models that they use. So I started from their basic model and then really tweaked it to be relevant in the situations we were serving, and then added a component to it of just the spiritual aspect. How do we then take this to a scriptural or spiritual conversation, as well as the emotional healing?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, as I've been talking with, talking with Reach Global staff or others here in the US, or those kind of what I've heard over and over again is we've been trained to share our faith. We've been trained to, explain the gospel in a concise way and give people an opportunity to, respond to that. But yet we're in scenarios and situations where that feels a little bit forceful or a little bit low EQ, because they're in the midst of crisis and we're pushing them and telling them something and they can't even necessarily take it in. So how do trauma care, what do you recommend in terms of that? Why is this helpful kind of in those situations where we still, like you said, want to really show up and recognize the spiritual component of what's happening and where God is in the midst of crisis, but yet not be sharing something that people aren't ready to take in.
Right. And, there are people, and I say great for those people. There are people that certainly may be gifted in the whole evangelism, street corner evangelism, or whatever it may be. That's not me. I can share the gospel really well, really concisely, in the context of relationship. And what we are doing when we're coming alongside of hurting people, we are developing relationship with them. We are living life with them. We are doing life with them. We are listening to them. We are giving them an opportunity to share. And I'm okay. And I'm okay not sharing the gospel in the first meeting, the second meeting, or it might be 3 months down the road when they are ready. Because you're right, when somebody experiences a crisis, they have a 50% diminish in their intellectual capacity, 50%. So when people are having to make the most difficult decisions, they're already coming at it, from a significant deficit. So sharing the gospel in that moment is not where we're going to be. But as we spend time with them, ministry of presence is huge. Coming alongside, sitting with them, listening to them, giving them an opportunity to share, then we are able to, we've, if you will, I'm going to, for lack of a better word at this moment, I'm going to say we've kind of earned that place where we can share where our hope comes from. And then we're able to, but I'm always in the initial conversation with them, I'm certainly going to start the conversation just in the sense of how can I pray for you right now? Would it be okay if I could pray for you? So I'm going to start the conversation. They're going to know that that's where I'm coming from. They're going to know my heart right from the start, but they're also going to see that I am not going to, just beat them over the head with the gospel, if you will. They're not ready for it. So we do have to wait for that moment. And oftentimes the opportunity presents itself well before I think it's going to.
Okay.
So yeah.
Could you maybe give an example of something like that? Or I know from your recent experience, maybe in Poland or
if I can go back a little ways, I think my first experience with it would have been in Nepal, where there was a village that was 100% destroyed. There was nothing left standing in this village, and a pastor had not been allowed into this village. 10 years earlier, they had some foreign missionaries coming in, and they really did. And these are his words. That's why it came so quickly to my head. they really did beat those people over the head with the gospel, saying, you need this, you need it now, and didn't develop relationship, didn't do anything. And they literally kicked the pastor out of the community and said, you are not welcome here. But in the context of crisis, and this obviously was a significant crisis, we were able to invite those people into a conversation, a healing conversation that helped us develop that level of trust. And today, that pastor is still welcome in that village. It was probably one of my best days of ministry ever, meeting with the village people, and just to see where it has come now is incredible. So that's an example from 2015. I could give you another one from Poland, but that's I just a really clear example of, we just came alongside, we developed the relationship with them, we helped them heal, we met their immediate emotional need. Then we've been able to meet those spiritual needs.
Yeah, and that's something I've actually really learned a lot from crisis response. So I've been, for those of you who don't know me, I've been working in Europe for the last 10 years with Reach Global, most of that time in Berlin. And we've never really had a crisis like the war in Ukraine as we have now, Europe, in my time in Europe. And so haven't really worked a lot with crisis response, and I'm getting to know you all and the resources that the great resources that you are. And one of the things that I've discovered about what you're talking about, which you can hear this theme, that there's the emotional, there's the physical, which is often the most immediate, the need for physical safety or physical comfort or care. But then there's the spiritual, and kind of this idea that it's holistic. Yes. Can you share anything more about that perspective or approach?
Yeah, so we really talk about transactional ministry versus transformational ministry. So often after a crisis, and this can be a big disaster, a war or a hurricane, but it can also be, the death of a loved one or an individual family home burning down. So often we want to go in and meet that obvious need, that physical need, and we can do that in every church. There's nothing bad about this. Don't hear me say anything bad, but a meal train. It's a beautiful thing for people who are hurting, so they don't have to worry about cooking meals, and we provide meals, and that's wonderful. And if we just cook a meal and drop it off, that's really a transactional ministry, right? But what if we drop off a meal and then say, hey, can I sit and eat this meal with you? Just the opportunity for transformation exists when we invest the time in people. And that's really our heart, is transformational ministry. So we need to take the time, and we always use our hand as that holistic ministry. So many groups or so many people will see the physical need as, the biggest, most obvious need, whereas we see the physical need as important, but it's not the most important. The spiritual, relational, emotional, and intellectual needs make up the person. I can help rebuild a house, but if I don't rebuild their life, if I don't share my hope and my help with them, there's no eternal lasting impact that I'm having by just rebuilding their house.
So I actually posted in the chat, some of you may have noticed, just that slide, Kat, from the workshop with the contrast between transactional and transformational, because I think this is one of the most powerful and helpful concepts that is in the workshop, and just in your ministry philosophy as well, coming alongside people in crisis. And so for those of you, kind of tracking, it should be a PDF if you can download it. Sochi, let me know if it didn't go through. But kind of where you can see on the hand, the spiritual, you said like the thumb, relational, right, emotional, intellectual, and then the physical. And can you help us explain, like, where do we get stuck when where do most of us kind of get stuck in keeping that transformational perspective versus transactional perspective in mind?
Well, because we are all caregivers of sort, right? We want to fix the problem. We want to meet that obvious need. So we want to get donations of clothing. We want to get donations of whatever. That's what people need in the moment, right? That's just the way we operate. Like we get stuck on the physical. We really do get stuck on that physical need. And because it is so obvious, because people do need a safe, a secure, a sanitary house to live. Absolutely. And that's the need we want to meet. But I think that is the biggest place. I mean, we get stuck in, and we leave it there. We're not able to move beyond oftentimes. Not everybody, please don't, I'm not generalizing here, not everybody, but just so often we get stuck there. And then the second place, I would say, especially as Christ followers, we do want to see people come to know the Lord as their Savior. And we feel like, well, we need to share right now. And that goes back to what we spoke about earlier. Some people may not be ready. So it's taking the time, allowing them the time to process their hurt. We know there's a way that can help them with that, but they just may not be ready. So getting stuck on the physical and getting stuck on that, I need to share right now, or I didn't do a good job because I didn't share the gospel. So taking the time
to show up and to figure out, it's almost a little bit like spiritual triage, like where are they at and what do they need? And so even though I have all of these things I can help with, it's like really kind of figure out, what do they need? What have things been like for them? And I know that's been a helpful just kind of starting point when I was recently in Hungary, and then also traveling in Poland, and then in Berlin, kind of looking at how Europe has been impacted by the war in Ukraine, and interacting with refugees or people who've been affected by the war, but everybody has had a unique experience. Not everybody has had the same. So I met a Ukrainian in southern Poland, and he had been in Poland for several years. So he was a little bit distanced. He wasn't immediately fleeing. He didn't have any of those immediate needs. But as we got to know him a little bit and interacted with him, then we realized, oh, but he's got major spiritual questions, because this is just prompted him to think about what his life is about and what his life is centered on. And if the whole world is moving and unstable, which most of us can kind of relate to after 2 years of COVID, that sense of like, what is my life tied to? And he was in a place where he wanted to then kind of pursue some of those questions that he had never really had. Yeah. But it just started with the same question that I would have asked somebody who literally just came across the border that day. Wow, what have things been like for you? And letting them kind of take that conversation. Yeah. Could you share an example from us, maybe from Poland recently? I know you interacted with a lot of people there, and the site that Crisis Response has set up in Poland is, a lot of people come from the border, working with a local church that is really serving their community really, really well during this time, and wanting to be there in new ways for their community as well. But can you share maybe an example of just what it kind of looked like to kind of use your training and this material in real life?
Yeah, I will. The first example, I mean, I think it's the most powerful example, and this really gives away what the whole training is about. It's our methodology that we use. But one of the first things that struck me when I got to Poland, when I started seeing the refugees, is these are real people, right? This is everyday people. These are business owners, electrical engineers. This is, these are like people who went to bed on February 23rd and life was perfectly normal, and woke up at 1 a.m. on February 24th, and nothing's going to be the same. One of the gals that I had an amazing opportunity to get to know very well, was a 21-year-old Olympic athlete for the Ukraine weightlifting team, and she was caring for her 14-year-old brother. And at 1 a.m, when her alarm started going off, get in the basement, the air raid sirens were going off and her watch was going off, her phone was going off, and she had to get down into the basement. And she's 21, caring for her 14-year-old brother, 2 hours away from mom. And, so eventually they get down into the basement, and she was able to sit with me and share her whole story. She shared what it was like living in that basement, trying to get a hold of mom, trying to figure out, what do we do? Like, she was in Chernihiv, which is a town that was being bombed right from the start. Immediately, they were getting shelled. Her windows had blown in and they were afraid to go outside, and started out the conversation with her. We had asked if she would be willing to share her story, and she was. And she shared her story. I describe it as she shared her story as if she was in as if she was in a movie, or she was replaying what happened in a movie. This happened, and this happened, and this happened, and this happened. There was very little emotion. And I think that was a great conversation, but I didn't want to leave it at that. That's not a healing conversation in and of itself. It did help her organize her thoughts. It helped her remember what happened. So it was good. But I want to take a conversation to the next level, because I know that in order for healing to happen, we have to get to the root of the issue. We have to look at the heart. And in order to look at the heart, we also have to look at the thoughts. What are your thoughts in this? So when she was all done, she was like, well, that's my story. And I was like, that's hard. Okay. I sat there for a few seconds, and then I just said, would it be okay if I asked you another question? And I just asked her, what thoughts keep going through your head? And she took a little bit of time, and she answered with, my friend is a firefighter and he's still there, and I'm so afraid for him, because every time those sirens go off, I know he's running to the fire. He's running to the bomb. He's not running away. And I was like, okay, so that was good, but still that wasn't where we needed to go. And sat there in silence for just a little bit longer. And then she said, really quietly, she'd been talking pretty animatedly, and she came out and she said, I feel like a traitor. I feel like I've betrayed my country. Why am I okay? Why am I safe and they're not? Why am I here? And that was where we needed to go with that conversation, because that is what was going through her mind continually. So even though she was going about her day looking like she was okay, that's what she was feeling in her heart. So that gave us a starting place to begin that healing process. Yeah.
Well, yeah. And as I hear you share that story, I think here's something that she had shame, that she felt shame for that.
Yeah.
And that just got brought to light. And then Jesus can bring truth and speak into that. But
Exactly.
You showed up in that moment to bring something that she probably wanted to stuff, down there, and that Satan wanted her to stuff. He doesn't want us to be set free. And then you showing up allowed that, just gave that a safe place to reveal that this sense of shame and guilt and responsibility that she had pushed away, which wasn't true, right? And so to be able to engage with her on that level, to see what kind of healing that could lead to down the road. Yeah, absolutely. Wow.
And the sooner somebody can begin to talk about a crisis, regardless of the crisis, the sooner they start to talk about it, the less likely they are to develop PTSD, because once they start talking about it, they're more inclined to share a little bit more and a little bit more. And Not to say that they won't get PTSD, because some of the things have been really hard that we're hearing, but they are less likely to stuff it. They are less likely to hold on to it. They are less likely to be bitter and angry and feel that shame as they start to talk about it.
Mhm. Yeah, that makes so much sense. I mean, just to
Mhm.
kind of deal with some of it, maybe not all of it, but some of it in these conversations, or to begin that process.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
Okay, so you and I have talked a little bit,
Mhm.
and I mean, you have experience in Nepal, I mean,
Mhm.
which is crazy.
Mhm.
And I mean, this is my learning curve with crisis response. I'm like, you are like special ops for Jesus, and it's the coolest thing. And Nepal, and you've been in other part, the Philippines as well, and recently you've told me, hey, we've never really done this in Europe. We didn't know if it would work, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
your
Yeah,
experience was, hey,
this is working.
this is working. So that's neat to see that in even a lot of different cultural contexts. And I'm sure there are tweaks and different
Yeah.
ways of saying things, and culturally appropriate ways of showing
Mhm.
empathy, right? All
Mhm.
those kinds of things that you want to keep in mind when working cross
Right.
culturally. Asking direct questions can sometimes be a little too much. Um, but what about the US context? I mean, I know
Mhm.
you're American, you grew up in this context, you have a lot of experience here, but I'm
Mhm.
thinking for most people on the call, I mean, some of them may go overseas and
Mhm.
may, eventually be involved in some sort of partnership or work in Europe related to the war in Ukraine, or I hope they are in the future. But in terms of, in their local church context,
Yeah.
what does it look like there, where we maybe haven't had an earthquake
Mhm.
uh, or war?
Right.
What does this look like for local churches here in the US?
Yeah. So honestly, when we first started, it was working so well internationally, and our culture is very different in the U.S. And I honestly wasn't sure, like, what is this going to be like here? And one of the first places that I saw it really impactful, and again, this is going to be a bigger disaster. I'll bring it into the more individual after, but the fire in Paradise, I'm sure a lot of you can recall, especially those of you in California, right? The West District here. Every story began with, I thought I was going to die. Every single story I heard. And prior to going to Poland, I would say that Paradise, California was the hardest place I had ever had to do this, because the stories were so hard. But the fact is, a majority, not all people want to share, but a majority of people want to share what is going on in their lives, what is going on the inside. They don't necessarily have somebody who's willing to sit and listen, or take the time to ask the good question that's going to prompt them to be able to share. And that's what I've seen even in the individual church context. We all have crises in the church. We're all part of the local church, so we know there's relational divorce issues, there's death, there's illness, there's problems with our children, and all of those issues. And there's a gal, and she was thinking about being on the call today. She's a pastor's wife, and she's seen it all. And what she says is that this method of having she wished she would have known it 30 years ago when she became a pastor's wife, because it has transformed the way she does conversation with those people in her church that are struggling with these issues. So again, we have seen it be extremely helpful. She just recently had a church family unexpectedly lost a 46-year-old father. He was running a triathlon, not a triathlon, excuse me, a half Ironman. So this gentleman in shape, unexpectedly died while he was running this race. And as she went over to talk with the family, she saw where they were stuck. And she was able to use this method to just help them begin to process. And as she was leaving, she got a hug from this gentleman's brother, who is not a member of the church, and just said, I didn't know. I didn't know that's where I was at. I didn't know that's where what I was thinking and feeling. So thank you for helping me process that. And again, we're not counselors, we're not therapists by any means. But when we give people the opportunity to share, and if we ask the right questions, people are able to get to the heart of the matter, regardless of the crisis. It is effective in our families, how we have conversations with our kids and our spouses. And so we've seen it in many areas, big, different contexts.
Yeah, I mean, hearing you talk, I think, everybody on this call has been in scenarios like where they've ended up in those scenarios, or they get regularly called into those scenarios, right? I mean, we've got pastors, chaplains, volunteers, church staff, like this is church planters, missions pastors, like these are people who are showing up in those scenarios. And this is just one more skill set for them to develop, or to help them be effective in those contexts and to show up really well. And someone, Bob, entered in the chat here and just said to me, it's sounding like one of the significant problems we have as responders to crisis victims is our natural tendency to drive the conversation forward ourselves, rather than letting that traumatized person choose the pace it will unfold.
It's like you read one of my slides that says we need to let them go at their own pace. We need to not drive the conversation, not ask those leading questions, right? The leading questions. So I think that is one of the hardest things. When we come in, we want to drive the conversation, and we have to be willing to take the time. It really is a time issue, right? We, especially in our Western culture, we are a fast culture, to slow down and let them share at their pace.
Yeah, absolutely. I know even for me, one of the things that I've seen, and I've seen this just recently, is that it's my own discomfort that actually prevents me from showing up, because I feel uncomfortable with the problem. The problem, I can't fix it. I can't solve it. And we have leaders on this call they get paid to fix and solve problems. Right. And so you don't become a leader if you don't care about fixing problems or or providing solutions and a vision for something else, something moving forward. And so it's really difficult to sit there, and then just that feeling of like, this is the worst situation I've heard of, maybe even that I can't imagine what it would be like going through it, right? You're processing it through your own experience and lens rather than understanding theirs. And that, for me, I noticed just kind of that this material really helped me to be just aware of that. Like, oh, there's the discomfort coming up. Just push that. That doesn't belong in this conversation. That's my issue. And I need to deal with it, because that's later I can deal with it. But in this moment, I need to focus on that person and not let that, I can't fix it. I can't solve it, or it's making God look bad. I think sometimes as Christian leaders, we want to defend God in those situations, and God was doing this, and he can really defend himself. And right? I mean, if he's all powerful and omniscient and all knowing, right? He can defend himself, but we kind of want to jump in rather than just let them lead and join them in that conversation.
Right.
And so, yeah.
I'd love to quickly just, when I was in Poland, there was a situation, and Satan is big too, right? Satan can grab a hold of us at times. And I was just like, oh, I'm so inadequate. I can't even talk to these people. I don't speak Ukrainian and I don't speak Russian. I'm like, what am I doing why am I here? And that was just a brief moment. It was a hard time. So emotionally, I was struggling in some areas, but this woman who came in just had the blank, just her face. I'll never forget the look on her face when I first saw her, just overwhelmed, lost, confused. And she was 70-ish years old and just alone. She was completely alone. She left Ukraine alone because her son had to stay to fight. And I was not able to actually share real words with her for 3 days. However, on day one, when I first saw her, I observed her face as she saw the church, and her face glowed when she saw the sanctuary. So Google Translate, I was just able to share with her that church was going to be tomorrow. And her face lit up and she gave me kisses on each cheek and grabbed my arms and said, thank you, in her way. And then for the next 2.5 days, I can't tell you how many kisses and love like that. And then on Monday morning, I came in and I sat, she patted the seat next to her. I sat next to her and she put her hand on my lap. She put her head on my shoulder at one point, and I still had not really shared a word with this person, but I was there. That ministry of presence. So we all want to fix, but there's some things we can't fix. Ministry of presence. I later learned her story and we talked through an interpreter. But as she was leaving the church, she'd been there about 10 days. She told the people who picked her up that I was her favorite. And that was a huge moment for my heart, because I didn't feel like I had done anything, but I sat with her, was just with her in her dire time of need. So just recognizing, slowing down, sitting with, being with people. Sometimes it's not the words we say, it's not the questions we ask, it's just being with them that will begin to help them heal.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's actually really relevant for our context, because even though it's maybe not Russian or Ukrainian, it could be Spanish speakers, Chinese speakers, it could be speakers of other languages that we don't know that are in our communities, right? I mean, I can think of multiple ministries right now that are reaching out to people where, very few are fluent in that language. And so to be able to say, hey, this is even helpful, this is going to help you show up even when you don't have the words, right? This may help you show up. And so again, that awkwardness of, I don't speak the language, what can I do? How you show up, your posture and presence in that moment is significant. So I think that's really helpful. And even as churches think through how to come alongside refugees, one of the things I've noticed is that the first response is, how can we feed them or house them? Kind of one of those two things, which are meeting the physical need again. But oftentimes what people need is more that emotional or their spiritual connection. And to say, even though I don't speak their language, how can I show up for them? How can I do that for them? And that may be a more powerful interaction than providing them housing or connecting them to housing. That's a need. I'm not saying that's a bad thing necessarily, but I think a lot of churches get stuck in in even developing programs centered around the physical need versus developing a ministry that actually sees the spiritual, emotional, relational need of the person too. So I think even in this material, there's a lot of concepts, ideas, and approaches that are really helpful, even as we think through outreach ministries and what it looks like to show up in the community.
Right.
So I'd like to transition the time to just more Q&A. So if you've been listening and wondered about something that Katrina said, just pop it in the chat and then we'll try to work it in here. Or you can just go wild and go off mute and shout out a question. But I know one of the questions that Mike asked was, hey, what are the questions we can ask? You know? And part of me is like, oh, I don't want to tell him because I want him to go to the training and the workshop. Where are you, Mike? But that is a teaser to that. This isn't the actual workshop. This is introducing you to the thinking behind it, the concepts of it, so that you can understand it better and invite Katrina or somebody on her team to be at your church and to train your church in this, train your volunteers, train your leaders in this material. That's part of what you all do and part of the services that you offer. And also on May 21st, on May 21st at Nova Community Church, Garrett, hey Garrett, and Dean Mayeda, that they are hosting a training for their volunteers. And in that time, we'd also like to train more facilitators. So maybe in your ministry or church, you want to get, or you yourself maybe want to get trained to facilitate the workshop. So you'd experience the workshop. It's about 2 hours. And then we'll do like a debriefing lunch for those who want to be trained. And so we're really looking forward to that on May 21st. And so you can reach out to me and I'll put my email in the chat. If you're interested at all, no commitment, to just if you're interested and want more information, I'd be happy to give that to you. So just wanted to mention that as well. But maybe could you share a few of the questions that you do ask? Would you mind? Can you give that away for us?
Yeah, I could. Yeah, and I want to.
Right now, the statistics are 1 in 7 head pastors, 1 in 4 youth pastors.
Sorry, that was a button I got pressed. I am revealing my age. I just had a technical fail.
No problem. So lost my train of thought. First thing I want to say, I want to speak to something you said, in that I know that many of you on this call are pastors and leaders, and maybe you already have some of these skills, but to be thinking about people within your churches that you would like to be at that training, you may know this, but it's a great skill for others to have. Lay people within the church is where we've seen it be so amazingly effective. But so the questions that I'm always going to start with are fact questions, because fact questions are going to allow people the opportunity. First off, it's going to invite the conversation, and it's going to help these people organize their thoughts. Just like I said, when I was talking to this gal, Natalia, the Olympic athlete, I started with, just tell me about your story. What happened? So what happened? What did you see? What did you hear? What was your experience like? Those fact questions. So often when we see somebody who's hurting, we start with the how are you, or how are you feeling? Though, I don't know how I'm feeling, but okay, so let's work into that. So tell me about the facts. So starting with those fact questions, it does a couple of things. It lets the person know that you really want to know. Have you ever asked somebody how they were and you were kind of just saying it and you didn't really want to know how they were? It was just conversation, so it lets them know that you're really invested. You want to hear their story. You want them to share. And it also shows them that you are going to listen. And that's a key. Listening well is super important in this. So fact questions. And as they're sharing, just again, I'm going to go back to that same example of Natalia. As she shares her story, I want to take her to that thought level, because it's our thoughts and our beliefs that control our behaviors, right? It's our thoughts, beliefs, and feelings control our behaviors. So we need to be able to recognize our thoughts and our feelings. So that second question I'm going to ask is going to be, or second, whatever it may be, is what has been the hardest part? Or what keeps going through your mind? Or I can't imagine what you were thinking in that moment. Like, what were you thinking when this happened? Or how has your thinking changed since the start of the war till now, or since start of COVID till now? So just those thought questions. And then ultimately, oftentimes you don't even have to ask the following question, which is that fact question, or the feeling question, because often they're just going to work their way into that. But with those feeling questions, I've started just saying, first, as soon as you say, how are you feeling? People oftentimes will shut down and be like, I don't know. So I try not to use the word feeling, but like I've started to say, like, what is this doing to you on the inside? You know, what is happening emotionally? Like, what is this doing to you? So I want to get them to be able to think about those feelings and go deeper. And sometimes we can't recognize what we're feeling, but maybe I can recognize what my spouse is feeling. So how has this impacted your husband? You know, what are you seeing in him? And as the person talks about the feelings in somebody else, man, can you relate to that at all? You know, so that's the simple. We said this was simple but profound. It's just fact, thought, feeling questions. And guys, I never ask a why question. I shouldn't say never. I rarely ask a why question because, you know, as soon as we ask a why question, people get defensive. Well, why didn't you evacuate sooner? Well, why didn't you do this?
Yeah.
And almost every why question can be rephrased to be a what question. You'll ask the same thing without the defensiveness. So that's it. Not much.
Yeah,
to it.
there you go.
Simple.
Thank you. And thank you, Sochi, for putting kind of the notes, the highlights in the chat. That's great, just so we can all track with that. And I noticed you also put the information about the May 21st event in my email. So thank you so much. Any other questions, things that you'd like to ask Katrina, things you're wondering about?
I did hear as you're looking at questions, I did hear somebody talk about working with Afghan refugees. And I'll say that I worked for 2.5 years in the Middle East with Syrian refugees. So a little bit different, but similar circumstances, and found this to be amazingly effective. Again, I had a Syrian refugee woman. I thought she was mad at me. She said, how do you know what I'm feeling and thinking? And I thought she was saying it in a bad way, but she then followed it up with, it's like you are inside of me. So just, it really has been effective in so many different contexts.
So I'm just posing a question in the chat right now. And if you'd like to respond, just, it would be helpful for us to even hear, hey, how do you think this material is helpful for your ministry or church or yourself? Just your own, you know, even your own personal, you know, relationships. What's been helpful about what you've heard today? And that will really help us know, hey, where this is, you know, hitting, and where the kind of relevance is for us. But of course, if there are questions too, you can pop those in the chat, but love to hear your thoughts. Hey, how is this helpful, or what component of what was shared today is helpful? But I think, yeah, Katrina, what you're talking about, like in terms of just wherever you are, I mean, again, maybe a lot of people on this call aren't working with refugees, you know, they aren't working with refugees overseas or even locally. They're just in a leadership position or overseeing or equipping volunteers. The homeless population, I know we probably have some people on the call who interact with the homeless. And I think these, do you have any thoughts in terms of the kind of the homeless context?
Yeah, I mean, my thought, yes, it would work. I mean, I am confident in saying at this point, I have to be confident in saying that this model is going to work with most populations, because I've seen it work in so many different contexts at this point. And I'm just going to go back to people want to share, even the homeless. And yeah, there are going to be people with reasons that they're not going to get it, you know, and if we're talking about the homeless, they may have other things going on, you know, intellectually that will prohibit them from getting it. So we'd have to look at those factors. But for the most part, it will work.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think so too. So we have a few just questions. Is it possible to do, from Mike, is it possible to do the training virtually for the district? And I actually am encouraging training to happen in person. I've gone through the training virtually and in person, and I think that there is something that happens in person when you feel it. And some of that is because you're also, when you're applying this, yes, you can apply it in a virtual context, but usually you're also applying it in that personal context. And I think it's really helpful to have that personal experience to see how it feels in the context, because you're actually wanting to develop some of those skills. It's not just content and just skill, it's applied skill, to your and processing as well. So my experience is the training has more impact in person. But Katrina, do you want to share some of your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I mean, you're exactly right. It does have more impact in person. It's easier for the trainer in person because I feel like I read a room really well. And obviously Zoom is amazing. Over the last 2 years with COVID, Zoom has been amazing. However, it does lack some things, right? And that personal contact is going to be best. But with that being said, I certainly have done it. I can't tell you how many times via Zoom over the last 2.5 years since COVID started, really. That's when we started doing it virtually. So yes, I can do it virtually. And yes, it will be more impactful for you and your people to do it in person. And I do have a team. So getting people, I have people on the East Coast, I have people on the West, I have people all over. So we are able to get people to you to be able to do this. And we don't charge for it. It's free. It's a service we want to offer to the EFCA churches, to the denomination. If you can help us find a place to stay and help us get to where we need to go, we're good.
Happy to come out. Yes. Yeah. And so that's what's happening on May 21st. And that's also the idea that we'd love to have people in our EFCA West district who are trained facilitators in this. So you've got Katrina's team, and they are going to help train more facilitators. And that's part of May 21st. The idea in a few weeks is to really kind of experience it at Nova Community, but also train others who can then facilitate these workshops, so that we have people in our district as well who can really be available to your church and train volunteers and train others for this. So just a quick question before we wrap up from Ron. He asked, where do we get the material that we're talking about? And that's material that Katrina's team has developed. It's not a book, it's not on Amazon. It's really material that they've developed. And so really attending one of the workshops is the best way to, you kind of got a little bit of a teaser today, but attending the workshop, and her team really kind of has developed this material themselves. So I don't know, maybe someday it will be on Amazon and we'll be famous and we'll be like, we knew Katrina back in the day. So, but that's a little bit of an answer for that. And I think we're ready to wrap up, but just want to say thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you so much for your time. I know all of you have so much on your plate and are navigating so many things, and to show up and to be here, to be present, ask questions, take it in. Thank you. And I really hope that it has an impact for you personally in your life, and that it helps you lead to see transformation around you in your church and in your local community as well. And so thank you, all of you, for being here. And thank you, Katrina, as well, for taking time out of your travels, your world travels, to be here and to share this material that you have worked so hard to develop for the sake of the kingdom and to represent Christ to people that we work with. So thank you so much, everyone. And I hope you have a great Wednesday.
Thank you all.